Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, the Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post of Parshas Chayei is titled Death, Dying, and Suicide. This week's Parsha, we read the pasuk V'yavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah livkosa, that Avram came to eulogize, to give a hesped for Sarah when she passed away, and to cry for her. I'd like to focus on this pasuk, and Rashi explains that there's a juxtaposition between the death of Sarah and the Akedas Yitzchak, because, as Mefarshim explained, when she heard about the Akedas Yitzchak, she didn't hear the end of the message that Yitzchak was still alive, but rather she just heard that her son Yitzchak was going to be killed in the Akedah, and she passed away from shock. And it seems to be there's a connection, a causal relationship between the Akedas Yitzchak and Sarah's death. And I'd like to focus on the pasuk when it says Livkosa, that Avram came and cried for Sarah. Because there's a small chaf, and there's an explanation of the Balaturim based on this small chaf. And we can take out some fascinating psychological insights from the explanation of the Balaturim. But it has to be said, to be honest, that this video is not long enough, because it's a very sensitive topic, and also, to be honest, deserves more time. But we'll take out what we can, just food for thought, some important points that we can learn something from this explanation of the Balaturim. So first of all, the Balaturim says that the small chaf is that Avram only cried a little bit. He didn't cry a lot because Sarah was old. She reached an old age. And actually the Torah emphasizes the age when she passed away, because it gives us the message that she lived a full life. She lived until the age that she was supposed to live. So even though there seems to be, based on Rashi, this causal relationship between the Akedas Yitzchak and her death, really is just a correlation. There's a connection. We see that one relates to the other, but it's not because one directly caused the other. And therefore, Avram understood that she lived a full life, and she lived until the age that she was supposed to, even though her death came about following the Akedas Yitzchak. And we could say that perhaps Avram, when he came to the point of the hesped and to eulogize and to cry for Sarah, that he would regret having gone through the test and overcoming the test of the Akedas Yitzchak, because we see it did result in the end. There is this connection with the death of his wife. So perhaps he would regret having gone through the Akedas Yitzchak. But what we see here, and the message of the small chaf, and based on the Balaturim, is that Avram did not regret having gone through the Akedas Yitzchak, even though there is this connection with the death of his wife. And the Mefarshim explained, the Slonman Rebbe explains that the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, works against us both before the performance of mitzvahs and setting challenges for us, but also afterwards. Not only is it perhaps difficult for us to do mitzvahs, but even if we do overcome the challenge of the Yetzer Hara, and we perform mitzvahs, we overcome challenges, it works also afterwards. That perhaps we will regret performing the mitzvahs. Perhaps we are plagued with doubt and uncertainty about the mitzvahs that we've done, about the challenges that we've overcome, and this undoes the mitzvah that we performed, or the challenge that we've overcome. And this is what the Satan tries to do. It tries to work against the person both before and after. So what we see with Avraham, he was able to overcome the influence and the efforts of the Yetzer Hara and the Satan both before and after in overcoming the challenge of the Akedah and not regretting it, even though there was the death afterwards of Sarah. And we see this also in mental health, that a person can go through, can have anxiety and depression and low self-esteem, low confidence, that stops a person from performing certain things, from being able to achieve their goals. There's this block that is that's in front of them because of their mental health. But even if a person does overcome it and they're able to achieve their goals, they're able to keep on track and fulfill their ambitions and targets, there's still mental health issues, and a person can be overly self-critical that undoes any achievements that they have performed. They can be so self-critical and self-judgmental that they think they've done nothing, that they're not worthy of achieving things, that really their success is a failure even. Or in cases of OCD, there's this constant checking, perhaps in a checking OCD, when a person does something, the mental illness and the anxiety which is involved in OCD leads the person to constantly they doubt themselves and they question what they've done. Is it good enough? So we see here in mental health as well, there's this aspect that we can take out from the Balaturim of this doubt, both before, the challenge before and the challenge after performing things. The second explanation of the Balaturim says that the small chaf is because, in a way, Sarah caused her own death. We see this connection of Rashi between the Akelis Yitzchak and her death is that through her response, it led to her death. Through her response to hearing about the Akelis Yitzchak, and in a way, based on the level of Sarah, the Balaturim is suggesting that she is culpable in a sense, that she caused her own death, and it's equatable to suicide. And based on the halacha of Ma'abed atzma ledas, ein maspidin oso, someone that causes their own death intentionally, someone that commits suicide intentionally, there is no hesped. Their death is not mourned. And the Rambam discusses in detail the halachas of suicide and says that somebody who commits suicide, that intentionally ends their life, and this is done as an intentional act, as a rebellion against Hashem, then this death is not mourned. If we take this halacha, although it seems slightly extreme to relate this to what happened to Sarah, it is using this halacha and suggesting that someone who commits suicide should not have a hesped, and that relates perhaps why Avraham only cried a little bit. It limits the eulogy and the hesped that he had for his wife. But if we equate this and move it over to mental health, the halacha of suicide and what the Rambam's talking about is really a very narrow case. Someone who really, in a sense, just decides that they want to end their life. It's an act against Hashem, and it's the antithesis of a Jewish hashkafa, the way a person lives their life in the commitment to Torah and mitzvahs. And that's why this suicide is not mourned. But in other cases, and certainly in mental illness, the key factor that we see here is ma'abed atzmo ledas, someone who commits suicide and kills himself intentionally, with das, with intention. And in mental illness, we can say that unfortunately, when we see suicide, it's a tragic result that through the mental illness, where a person does not have das, it's not intentional, they're in deep suffering or psychotic state, it is not in a state of das, and unfortunately it's a tragedy that happens, that we couldn't help the person, or the person was not in a healthy enough state to be able to live their life, and this resulted in suicide. And that certainly we will not suggest this. We will not say that this halacha applies. And their life is a tragedy, and their death is a tragedy, and it is certainly mourned. But what we can take out from this, and what the Balaturim is suggesting, is an understanding of how this halacha of suicide is applied, and how perhaps in the case of Sarah, it limits the crying of Avraham Avinu. But hopefully what we can take from these messages and the explanation of the Balaturim is that we can live life mindfully, we can live life intentionally, and hopefully our life can be lived which will be healthy and happy with no regrets. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.